Hi, and welcome to episode of CineNation. My name is Brandon Sparks.
And I'm Thomas Horton.
And here at CineNation, we like discussing genre. We like kind of delving into genre and tropes and the history of it. And this month, we did Texas Month last for the month of May. And for the month of June, we're looking at theater movies. And one thing we kind of like doing here is kind of carving out a genre in some way. And we like looking at genres that aren't particularly classified as genres, if that makes sense. I know not all genres are heist movies or courtroom dramas, but they're a little bit more smaller in scope. And I think theater movies kind of fit into that category. So we're kind of going to create a template for that in this episode, and then we'll kind of discuss it for the rest of the month. And so, Thomas, like, what do you think of when you think of theater movies?
I mean, honestly, I think of, like, before we started doing all this, if you were to say theater movie to me, I would think of, like, a musical that had been adapted from stage into film. That would just be where my mind went to automatically. And I've studied like the musical before, and I kind of know the background of like a how it started as like reviews and backstage musicals and that sort of stuff. But like that's the first thing that pops to my head is like Cats or something like that.
Cats, always Cats. Yeah, so it's like people kind of think like the adaptation of a musical or a play or something like that. But with this, we're going to be kind of like just. In some cases, these movies follow actors who were on a show, or like you're saying, kind of the production of a show. And do you have any connection to theater?
Not really. My high school did not really have much of a theater program, which is weird. I'm not sure what happened when I was in middle school. We used to like take field trips to go see the big high school productions. It was like a big thing. Like our high school theater department was huge. And then like right when I got there, it felt like it just kind of went away. And I think they only did one production like the entire time I was in school. They did
wow.
Footloose sophomore, junior year. I know I went to see them do Footloose, but I don't remember them doing anything else beyond that. And then in college, I had a bunch of friends in the theater department in college, so I like went to go see their shows. A friend of mine did an extended run of God of Carnage. They did it, and then it got picked up for like a summer festival, and I went to go see her do that a few times. And oh man, I can't even remember. I did a show once.
What was it?
It was for my friends. It was for my friends directing like senior project, and he did an abbreviated version of Neil Simon's Laughter on the 23rd Floor.
Interesting choice. And
it was a lot to direct. It's just like a bunch of people in a room yelling at each other. Yeah, and I was in that for him. It was a good time.
I was in drama in high school and did it for all 4 years in high school. Was our school's first president of the drama department. So there we go. It was we had a thespian society is what it was, and I was the first kind of official president of that. And then I minored in theater in college and did that. So some of the stuff with some of these movies was like very like nostalgic, and we'll talk about that.
I did forget. I took acting 101 because somehow we found a loophole where all of my friends could get in it, and it was just my friend group in the entire class. And that was a good time. Yeah, acting 101. I did a monologue from The Glass Menagerie as my final.
Oh, that sounds like an acting 101 choice. Yeah, I pretty much I did so brief. I mean, it's not. I was never paid for any of these jobs like most high school and college productions, but I was like stage manager, actor, assistant stage manager in community theater, lighting design, sound stuff. Like I did kind of almost every job except like props and costumes, but I dealt with those people, so I can tell you all about it, but never got paid for any of it because it was all like, it's all for the art. But some of these movies, I'll kind of bring up that experience as we go about the community theater aspect or the high school aspect or the college aspect. So let's start off talking about this kind of the history of it. So, I mean, early on, musicals, the turn of the century of 1900, it came up out of Broadway, and a lot of the shows were kind of originally based on like vaudeville acts, variety show acts, and then it became these musical reviews by people like Florence Ziegfeld, who did things like the Ziegfeld Follies, where it was kind of like a hybrid of all these different things like variety and vaudeville, where you had comedians like W.C. Fields or Ray Bolger and these people. And then you bring up, and the big thing about the Ziegfeld Follies was his chorus line called the Ziegfeld Follies, but his reviews, basically that was the kind of big centerpiece, and it was these beautiful chorus line, this beautiful women in these chorus lines, and we're known for this kind of spectacle. And there's a movie called The Great Ziegfeld, which is kind of a biopic of Florence Ziegfeld and his rise to the top on Broadway. Starred William Powell. I had to do and I just realized this, I forgot about this. In high school, I had to do a report on Florence Ziegfeld. Like, I had to actually play Florence Ziegfeld in like my speech. Like, it was a thing we did in class where like you came up and like did a speech as the person from this era. So when this Florence Ziegfeld had like a top hat, did a whole speech. It was terrible. But they started off doing musical reviews on Broadway, and films kind of early on in terms of musicals, when sound came in, that was kind of the original like way to bring in theater into film. And a lot of these musicals were kind of these, what we would call backstage musicals. Weirdly, as time has gone on, backstage musicals have kind of fallen to the wayside in terms of film and even theater. And it's more of these integrated musicals like Cats, Into the Woods, like just kind of the big musicals you think of, Grease even. That's kind of what integrated musicals are, but backstage musicals are about kind of putting on a show. And that's kind of how this genre gets started in film. 42nd Street, which we're going to talk about, is not the first one. I think the first one might be the Broadway Melody, which won the Oscar. I think the second year the Academy Awards were around. Apparently, it's not that good. I've never seen it, but I think it's Broadway Melody of 1929 is what it was. But anyway, so first we were going to talk about the kind of establishes this backstage musical and kind of become the prototype for it all is 42nd Street, which came out in 1933, and it has since been adapted on stage on Broadway. And the Broadway musical kind of takes songs from 42nd Street, I think from Gold Diggers of 1933, Dames. So a lot of these early 1930s backstage musicals kind of like evolved into the 42nd Street musical of the 1980s. So Thomas rewatched 42nd Street. I also rewatched 42nd Street. Thomas, what is it about? What is 42nd Street about?
It's about the production of a show. It's got a lot of like threads going, like story threads going on. But it's about a famous actress who's like a little washed up, it seems, and she has a sugar daddy that she talks into putting a show on for her, and it's just kind of about the like building out the cast. It's a lot of like chorus girls who all know each other, and then you're also following a young girl who has never been a chorus girl before and gets cast for the first time, and she starts having kind of a romance with a man who is also in love with the famous actress, and she's also, I mean, there's all kind of, it's kind of complicated.
Yeah, it is.
But ultimately, a lot of stuff goes down, and she ends up, of course, being the star of the show by the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole plot line of the director who's like ill, and it's like it's kind of he thinks it's his last hurrah, I guess you could say. It's like, I think he says, his name's Julian March, the character. He's like, the doctors told me not to do it, but I'm sick. I have to keep directing, basically. Is I have to put on the show no matter what. And so you have these kind of threads of Ruby Keller is the young actress who is part of the chorus line, and then later gets chosen to become the star for opening nights. That's the thing. And this really establishes the idea of the whole putting on a show aspect of the genre, and specifically how with a lot of movies I watched in this, I don't know if you noticed this, but it's always Act 3. The show must go on is kind of my big thing that I've noticed is that in these type movies, it's backstage musicals or even just like straight movies about putting on a play, the show has to go on in Act 3. You might see snippets of it of like the previews or whatever beforehand and the rehearsals, but the opening night the putting on the show is always like Act 3.
Yeah, and you're gonna get a lot of it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, anywhere from like, I'm not sure exactly how long the runtime is for like the Red Shoes, but like that, like
Yeah.
the actual show of the Red Shoes is like a solid like 40 minutes on the tail end of that movie that is like uninterrupted
Yeah, like
performance.
the one I'll bring up later we're talking about is Opening Night by John Cassavetes, and I think the last half hour of the movie is just the play,
Mm-hmm.
and you're seeing the everyone kind of freaking out backstage or everyone on stage. It's just you're getting all of that in the last third of the film, and I think 42nd Street kind of establishes that where it's the okay, like the big line, probably the cliche line of the movie is Sawyer, you're going out there a young woman, but you better come back a star.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the whole. It's the Star is Born,
Yeah,
storyline. And 42nd Street, why it's important is because you have the rising star, the Star is Born with Ruby Keller's character. You have the fading star with the person who's supposed to, the original actress who's supposed to be starring in the play. And then you have kind of the fading director in a way who's using these characters as a way to continue his career.
in classic Hollywood style, you also have, outside of the plot, you have your rising star in like one of Ginger Rogers' first roles, right? I mean, she's like a very small side character in this, but she does get like a number.
Yes. And to put this in, to also talk about this, is that 42nd Street came out in 1933, and it did so well. They had another movie kind of on the back burner called Gold Diggers of 1933.
43rd Street.
43rd Street. But Gold Diggers of 1933 pretty much has the same exact cast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Ginger Rogers, Dick Powell's also in it. Ruby Keller, a lot of the like supporting actors as well are in it. I was like, I guess it shows the names. I watched Gold Diggers of 1933 to prep for this as well. It shows all the cast before the movie. I was like, oh, this is pretty much the same exact cast. It's like they just said, hey, let's just do the same movie again. And it's the same thing. It's they're putting on a musical. It's set during the Depression era. Another thing too that these movies deal with early on is like putting it during the Depression and talking about it in some way.
I love
it's
my favorite part of the movie. I want to take this clip and like put it on TikTok. I feel like it would blow up. But at the very beginning, the sugar daddy character is like telling her, she's like, "Oh, I need a show," and he's like, "Don't worry, you're a star. You'll get a show." And she goes, "With this depression?"
And so that kind of continues into Gold Diggers of 1933, where it starts off with this big, huge Busby Berkeley number, and then the bank comes in and was like, "Hey, you didn't pay your bills. We're taking all the set." And it was just like the producer had all these like bills that he had, or all these loans he had taken out, and because of the Depression, they're like, "Okay, we need the money. If not, we're taking all the show." He's like, tomorrow's opening night. You can't do this," and they take everything. And then all the actresses are just like living in the same apartment together. Like, what do we do? There's Depression on. Anyway, so you had some thoughts on 42nd Street. Yeah. And I wanted to bring this up.
I mean, I told you and I watched this in college. I took a movie musical class within genre studies, and this was like the first one that we watched. And the first time I watched it, it came off as like a little bland to me. And I told you after a rewatch, I think what I realized is, and I call this like the Citizen Kane effect, but it's, if you look from a historical standpoint, this is such a historic movie from style and especially visuals. I mean, when we were watching it in class in college, my professor just kept saying, and apparently, I don't know, this is what he told me. I don't know if this is what is agreed upon in history. I'm going to assume so because I respect him a lot as a professor, but that it was Busby Berkeley's idea to get the camera up on stage for his dance numbers, even though he was the choreographer and not the director. They said he was very influential in saying, like, we need to get the camera in to the dancers. We're not going to put the camera behind the proscenium, and it needs to be up in there, and I'm going to choreograph around the camera. And before that, any kind of like staged a movie about being on stage was just kind of shot from the audience point of view. And so that's what we specifically like broke down the Young and Healthy sequence, which is Dick Powell and Ginger Rogers. And there's a very famous shot in which the camera is on a rotating platform. It's standing still as the platform rotates, and all of the dancers are like moving over the camera, and then you arrive at Dick Powell and Ginger Rogers like on the ground.
It's Ruby Keller. Yeah,
oh,
it's
no, that's Ruby Keller's not in that one, right? Young and Healthy.
It's the Big Lebowski shot.
Yeah,
Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
I think it's Ruby Keller and Dick Powell. I thought.
Well, I'm gonna Google this in a second. All right, hold up. I'm doing it now. Young and Healthy.
You're correct. It is Ginger Rogers.
Aha! All right, there we go.
I was wrong. I thought it was just
Shuffle Off to Buffalo is her. Like,
yes, with her and with him and Dick Powell, or her and Dick Powell. Yes, you're correct. Ginger Rogers in this one. For some reason, because I always thought it was one continuous number, and that's why I was putting in my head. So Ginger Rogers, who was in that number with Dick Powell.
But yeah, like you mentioned, that was the Coen brothers referenced it, and that is just how we're used to dance being shot now.
Yeah.
In the way that it is very hard to take yourself and sit and go, this was the first time they did that. And when you watch Citizen Kane, you have to have this built-in thing about like, this was the first time they ripped the floors out and they shot from the floors up, and nobody had ever shown a ceiling in a set before, like all that kind of stuff that everyone talks about with Citizen Kane. It's hard. You have to be like completely conscious of what you're watching in front of you being like groundbreaking. And if you're not, it's gonna come off as cliche because it has been referenced so many times by things behind it. So it's tough. It's this weird thing that happens very occasionally to movies where it's like, if you become so influential that you in yourself just look like another one of these movies, and that's what it feels like. There's like, I don't know, if you didn't know the historical significance of this movie, you'd be like, oh, it's another like Star is Born musical movie. Maybe.
I don't know. I really love this movie. That's the thing. I mean, yeah, that's you're talking about the cliche part. The quote I want to bring up with Pauline Kael was when Busby Berkeley died, they talk about 42nd Street, and Pauline Kael says, the one that gave life to the cliches that have kept parodists happy. Like, that's the one that people, it's like, when you think of Busby Berkeley and his kind of numbers, like, he did a lot of movies, but 42nd Street is always kind of the archetype of what Berkeley would do. Mm-hmm. And what's weird too, because when watching Gold Diggers in 1933, I think 42nd Street's story and script is better, but Gold Diggers of 1933 has much better set pieces, like musical set pieces. Like, you can tell just from 42nd Street to Gold Diggers of 1933, Berkeley really like honed skills in terms of how to direct dance and musical numbers on screen and how to shoot for it. Because there's some parts that are a little rough in 42nd Street where the cuts are really kind of hard and jarring, especially at the last number. And everything in Gold Diggers is very smooth in how they do it.
Well, and here's my thing, and we won't have like another musical. We have one other musical in the list here, but I'm a big fan of like, and I know there's I can't remember the term for this. Is a performance musical where all the music that is being shown on screen is being performed in real life. Yeah, I like the other stuff. I'm not sure what the exact term is for that. I know we learned it in college.
Well, what I was saying is that's called integrated musicals.
Yeah,
it's like it's inherent in the plot with the songs that are happening.
That's what I heard it referred to. Performance musical as in that person is actually performing it, whereas in other types of musicals it's almost like a soliloquy.
And the soliloquy is integrated, where it's like,
so like, in Grease, when he's singing Stranded at the Drive-In, like, he's not actually sitting at the drive-in like singing it out loud. You have this understanding that it's like some sort of outside reality. That's what I kind of look for in a musical. And there's a structure to that. And so in this movie, like we talked about, it's like, 2 acts of a movie and then all the musical is like back-ended. It's weird. Yeah. It's not exactly what I look for in a musical. That's not my cup of tea necessarily.
And that's why I think in terms of the backstage musical, why that has faded out of like the genre of film musicals, because it's not inherent in the plot. Like, you're not seeing characters.
I think Chorus Line is like the only one I can really think of that is really both.
But it was that kind. It just kind of stops the plot, is what the backstage musical kind of does. It's like, okay, we're gonna take a break from the plot and we're gonna have our lead actress sing this melancholy ballad or whatever, which is what happens in Gold Diggers. And that has faded out of, I mean, it's not being used anymore. And you can understand why, and how the kind of tropes of backstage musicals have turned more into people putting on a play, not a musical, but a straight play, which you'll see pop up in Me and Orson Welles and things like that we'll talk about later. So that's, it kind of, those tropes are started in 42nd Street, but the musical aspect is kind of taken out of it for modern films today. I do argue it establishes the backstage musical and is probably, as you say, one of the more, it's the Citizen Kane of these musicals. You might not love it, but
you can appreciate it for sure. And I think it's also a great watch for like if you're interested in like kind of pre-code kind of stuff too. Like they touch on some like very mature kind of stuff in a very fun way. It's a very biting take on Broadway, it feels like.
Yes, it is.
They're really poking fun hard at some of the Broadway like stereotype, the actors and the patrons and the actresses and all that kind of stuff.
And that's a good point, and that transitions well into To Be or Not to Be, which I feel pokes fun at actors and
100%
the theater world tremendously, of kind of just how, I mean, egotistical, I don't know if that's the word for it, like Jack Benny is just very obsessed with himself.
Yeah, the ego stars. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Is it him and Carole Lombard? And Carole Lombard is like the talented actress who's always been the shadow of her husband. And Jack Benny's like, it's okay. Anyway, To Be or Not to Be, to break down the story of it first. Directed by Ernest Lubitsch, who was kind of like a master director in terms of comedy, or kind of dramatic comedy in a way at this point in the 1940s and late 1930s. But the movie starts Jack Benny and Carole Lombard, and it takes place they're in Poland, is what it is, right before the Nazi German invasion of 1939. It's a comedy.
It opens on Hitler.
It opens on Hitler, but opens on this like narration of like, what's going on? Who's in Germany? Why is everyone? Their faces are so
it's almost like
startled.
It's not an out and out like newsreel, like fake newsreel.
Yeah.
Shout out Citizen Kane for one of their many groundbreaking moves within Citizen Kane, making a fake newsreel, but it's close. It's definitely like inspired by like kind of the newsreel style.
And what you find out is that Jack Benny and Carole Lombard are part of this theater troupe in Poland, in Warsaw. And they are doing Hamlet at the moment as their production, but they are in the midst of transitioning into this new dramatic play about Nazi Germany and the Gestapo. And so the opening, you have the newsreel thing, but then it transitions into like what you think is actually like a meeting at like the Gestapo headquarters. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it feels kind of this like dark, like this Gestapo is like, you're seeing what they're doing in Germany at the time. And then you find out, oh, it's just them putting on a play. And the guy who's playing Hitler, he's like, the director's like, he doesn't look like Hitler. He's like, I do look like Hitler. And they're like, no, you don't. He goes, I'll prove it. I'll walk outside and prove to everyone that I'm Hitler. Mm-hmm. And that's how Hitler wound up in Warsaw. But so you have that brief thing about the theater, and you have them performing Hamlet, and the whole line for To Be or Not to Be comes into play here, is that Jack Benny's putting on Hamlet, and his wife, Carole Lombard, has this kind of thing with a young soldier who's in Poland, and he's infatuated with her, been a huge fan of her work, and she keeps getting flowers from him, and she tells him, come back to my dressing room when my husband, or when Hamlet goes into his To Be or Not to Be speech. So it has this it's an actor's worst nightmare, is that you're performing Hamlet's most famous speech, and right when you start, someone on the front row gets up and walks out.
We'll talk about that speech a little bit later on too.
Well, because it comes up Me and Orson Welles, right?
Yeah, it's important.
We'll talk about that.
Important part of that.
It is an important part. So anyway, but yeah, so it's like, so the theater company gets shut down when Germany invades Poland, and what happens is all these actors get tied up in this like essentially this spy ring in a way. Yeah. Like basically the soldiers in Poland find out that one of their I think they're doctors or professors that talks with them is actually a Nazi spy. And they've given him information of all these like Polish sympathizers and the families of these Polish soldiers. And he's going to take the list of names back to the Gestapo in Poland, and then all these people be captured. And so basically the actors have to pretend to be the Gestapo in order to get the list from the Nazi spy. I had watched this before. I think I brought this up in the Screwball comedy episode because it's very much. I think this is a screwball comedy to me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's some romance built into it. It's a falling back in love kind of thing between the main couple.
So, what were your thoughts about? Because you never seen it before this. You'd seen the remake of it.
Yeah, I'd seen the Mel Brooks one several times because it was in my Mel Brooks box set that I got when I was a kid, and I was obsessed with Mel Brooks. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. It's very sharp. Like I kind of thought. I remember finding out that the Mel Brooks one was a remake and being like, oh, they must have definitely like sharpened it up, because there's no way in like that period they would have been that critical of like Nazis and just kind of making fun of them. But
they were.
But yeah, it definitely did. Yeah, and I think it's also, having watched a bunch of these, this was the last one I watched out of the group, and it was really fun to see a take between like 42nd Street and Stage Fright, which we'll talk about next. The diva had become like a very go-to stereotype in these movies, and this is the only one within this group, and one of the only ones of that time period I've seen to really like flip it and just have an out and out male diva. Like it is all Jack Benny all the time, and you come to understand that his marriage is like on the verge of falling apart because he's so self-obsessed. And there's this kind of recurring joke that even though he finds out his wife is having an affair, he's like more insulted that she was having an affair during his monologue than like necessarily like cheating on him. So yeah, that part's fun for sure.
There's a scene that I was just like, this is like, there's a lot of sexual innuendos in this movie too. For 1942, there's the scene when Carol Lombard and Robert Stack, who plays the soldier, having the first conversation when he comes back to her dressing room, and she finds out he's a pilot. And there's so many comments in that scene that they're just talking about sex. So how else would this movie be theater? Yeah,
I mean, you kind of start, as it goes on, you kind of start to lose a little bit of the like theater aspect, because this is probably the most like plot driven, one of the more plot driven movies within this thing. But I think definitely like the hot-headed star for sure. This is definitely sending up all of that with his character,
and I would say probably the not just obsessive, but the very like staunch playwright, if that makes sense. Like he's like, get my words right. It's just very this like stereotypical playwright of like, I'm God.
You've even kind of got the like Star is Born aspect. Like they do a twist on that, but you've got the one character, I can't remember his name, but the character that they like call him up and they need him to be a distraction, and
he plays the Shylock.
Yeah. And he's never really had like a big role, and they were like, this is it. This is your starring role. You have to like get in these Nazis' faces and like scold them as a Jew. And it's, that's your like, you're going out there a star, like you're going out there a kid and you're coming back a star. That's like that moment, but it's like you could be killed doing this.
And he's amazing in that scene. His name, the character name is Greenberg. The actor name is Felix Bassart. He was a guy who was used in a lot of Lubitsch films. He was in Shop Around the Corner as Jimmy Stewart's best friend.
Oh yeah.
He's also in Ninochka as one of the Russian spies who comes to like the Western civilization and realizes he loves it and wants to stay and not go back to cold Russia. Also, so one of Lubitsch's troop members, basically. But yeah, it's like, and the scene when he's like confronting the Nazi soldiers, like I said, it's a dramatic scene. Like there's not a laugh in that scene, and that's kind of it's funny. The irony of it is that his character's always, that'll get a good laugh. And that's what we always keep saying. But in his big scene, there's not a single laugh. It's crazy to think he took the words of Shakespeare from Merchant of Venice, and then it becomes this very topical moment. I would also argue Act 3 is them putting on a show. It's not the usual take of actually putting on the show on a stage. they've realized because the theater's been closed, well, we have to use what we did when we did that Gestapo, when we were rehearsing for that Gestapo play, and actually use it in real life, and like actors becoming heroes in a way.
I mean, to me, it feels like it plays out like a heist movie, but maybe a
It
heist
does.
movie is just a theater movie. I mean, it's all about rehearsal.
Okay.
It's about getting your cast, about doing rehearsals,
Okay.
it's putting on the play.
I thought that same thing when I was watching Waiting for Guffman, and we'll talk about that when Christopher Guest, when Corky is like going around and like trying to round out his cast, and he's just like, "Hey, I've heard you've done a little acting in your
How
life."
tall are you? 6'2"? Oh wow, 6'2".
Oh yeah. Oh, you can fit into the costume. It feels like this is the sequence when he's finding his team. And I was like, wow, this really is kind of a heist movie.
Mm-hmm. Wow, all you guys out there are like, oh, Heat's my favorite movie. Guess what? You love theater movies.
One's the fading star and one's the rising star in Heat. and the stars, one of them has to go.
Yeah.
You can't have two at the same time. Can't have both. That's Heat. Heat, the musical. That's what we need next. Anyway, so... And also, too, as you mentioned, and we'll briefly mention this, is like without this movie, without Ernest Lubitsch, you don't have Mel Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't really have the producers or the remake of To Be or Not to Be or History of the World Part 1. It feels like his kind of biting comedy, his spoofs that he would call. I feel like this is part of that DNA.
Yeah, it's like it's silly and smart at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. So onward. We've moved out of the 30s, out of the 40s, and now we're moving into the 50s. And the movie we're going to talk about here it's not really a popular film. Like it's directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and I would argue it's one of his lesser known films, and it's called Stage Fright. And I want to talk about Stage Fright because what I'm finding out when we're doing these kind of like month-long looks at genres is there's always kind of a little subgenre within this genre we're covering that deals with horror or deals with thriller in some way, and they're set at the theater, in the theater world, and Stage Fright fits into that. And so, can you give us a brief rundown on Stage Fright?
Yeah. Stage Fright is once again about a young man devoted to an actress. There we go. That's To Be or Not to Be. I believe he's a backup dancer, or like a chorus line dancer. And he comes to a friend of his who is an actress and says that this actress he's been having an affair with has murdered her husband and has asked him to cover up for her and to take the evidence and get rid of it. And so then you follow this young woman who is a friend of his as she gets herself involved in the investigation and goes kind of undercover as a maid to this actress played by Marlene Dietrich to like figure out to get enough evidence to show that like she did it and to save her friend and like get him. And in the meantime, she becomes involved accidentally with the detective who is on the case, and all these Hitchcock webs are woven.
Yeah, and she also not just a maid, but she ends up being her dresser.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
in the play that she's in, and it's played by Jane Wyman. It's one of Hitchcock's between like mid 40s to mid 50s. Hitchcock has a period where it's like he has people would argue a masterpiece, and his next film is this like lesser known film. So you have things like Stage Fright, you have things like I Confess, which we talked about, I believe, in our Faith episode, and Under Capricorn, even Lifeboat, and Stage Fright I think fits neatly into that group of forgotten Hitchcock films. So Thomas, what were your thoughts on this movie?
Yeah, I mean it's very, as you were kind of talking about like the more forgotten Hitchcock films, I feel like a lot of them aren't come back to as much because they don't necessarily fit into the like Hitchcock as an auteur kind of thing. And it like as soon as I started watching this one, I was like, oh, this is Hitchcock. There's a very famous legend of that when he was a child, to punish him once, his father took him to the police station and handed him over and said, he's a bad boy, lock him up. And they like put him in a cell for what he said was several hours. It might have just been a couple of minutes. But he has always openly ever since then had a like been terrified of police officers, and has always explored the idea of like an innocent man accused. Like that is one of his like go-to things, is like being on the run from the cops, knowing that like you can't talk to, knowing that you're like, even though you know that you're innocent, like knowing that you can't talk to anybody and being suspicious of everyone. And that's 100% on display here. Like as soon as I started watching, I was like, "Oh, it's the innocent man." Like,
but there's a twist to it.
Yeah,
it's
extremely well done.
You're not really following the innocent man.
Right.
You're following the person who's trying to prove he's innocent, which is a rarity in the Hitchcock genre.
Yeah.
Like it's usually you're following Cary Grant trying to prove himself innocent, or you're following Jimmy Stewart or whoever. Like you're following these people to prove, hey, I didn't do this. And that's always been a thing. And with this one, what makes it so different for him is that you're following the woman who's trying to save this guy. And he is kind of just he only pops up, I feel like, in a handful of scenes.
He's gone for most of the second act.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so she uses her father, who's played by Alistair Sim.
So good in this. Oh, man.
He's really good.
I've only ever seen him in, I really think the only thing I've seen him in is Christmas Carol, but he was so fun in this. I really, really enjoyed his performance here.
And there's moments, especially the ending sequence, where in terms of visual style, and even like the way Hitchcock uses sound, that's like, I think his like it definitely, it's a movie that builds to the proper climax of the film. And it's the ending, we won't say what it is, but the ending is it's a finale.
Yeah, it's Hitchcock for sure. Like it's interesting that this one isn't brought up as much in the like Hitchcock auteur studies, because it's definitely there with a lot of the different themes, and yeah, like you said, it's very like visually bold in some points. That the towards the opening, when he goes to the house to check on the body, it's incredible. It goes in, the camera follows him down the street, up the steps, in the door, up 2 flights of stairs, and then into the parlor room, just seamlessly.
And they said this is one that kind of is known for its extreme long takes, like in Rope. Like it's in a period where he's really playing around with long takes in his movies. And this is kind of at the tail end of that, where you have Rope in 1948 and this in 1950.
But yeah, I mean, I think one of the like crazy like crane shots that everyone always points to with him is that shot in Notorious, where you come down and zoom in on the key and you go through the whole party. But this felt maybe there's not as much background action to direct in this one, but it was still extremely impressive. But yeah, man, really enjoyed it.
It's a fun one. It's underrated. So how is this theater, besides it being set in the world of theater?
I mean, it definitely takes into account, like we were talking about, it takes into account that the stereotype of the diva.
With Marlene Dietrich.
And plays with it a little bit, plays with your expectations. But yeah, I mean, you're supposed to be introduced to her, and immediately between like Marlene Dietrich's own reputation and what we know going all the way back to 42nd Street about, you know, the kind of the negative connotations that these movies represented about famous actors. Yeah, you're immediately like, oh yeah, we know who this is. We know what kind of person this is. And the movie continues to kind of play with that throughout. And also I mean, you've got the like star in the upcoming. They're always kind of cutting back to the idea that she is the main character is an aspiring actress, even though this is it's not technically stage acting. She is acting, and she's putting her talents to use. And
that's a fair point.
Yeah, it's in a weird way, it's about the rising star and the falling star.
Yeah, she's like training at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and I think the first time you see her is that the guy who is accused of murder interrupts her acting class to talk with her. I think is what it is. Yeah. This is the first time you see her. And yeah, you also have I don't think we're really talking about this in any of the movies we're covering, but there is this kind of character of the dresser in theater movies, and those, I think there's even a movie called The Dresser that is a part of our list. So that is a kind of just a side character that is not always explored in theater movies.
I gotta shout out. I'd always known that the song. Speaking of Mel Brooks, I had always known that the song that is performed in Blazing Saddles was like a parody of a real Marlena Dietrich song. This is it. This is it.
Yeah.
She's got the one in
laziest gal in town.
Yeah, she's got the one in Blazing Saddles. It's just like, I'm so tired, and it's just her like yawning the whole time.
Yeah, that's this movie.
As soon as she started singing this one, I was like, wait, this is that song.
I have heard this. Yeah, it's and I do think, I mean, I'll throw this one out there, because I do think there is a little niche genre or subgenre of horror movie set at theater. And I think an example of that, and see if you'd count this, is Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I mean, you know, we had a talk before this all went down as if we were including ballet in this. But I mean, you've also got Black Swan and Suspiria. Like, yeah, there's definitely something. I mean, there's something inherently, you know, kind of creepy about like when all the house lights are out and the spotlight's on the stage, there's something inherently creepy about what's going on backstage, what's going on the catwalk. Like it's just there is something mysterious and that you can play with in that. But yeah, I think Phantom of the Opera is definitely Phantom of the Opera is weird because it's an integrated musical. It's a backstage musical.
A backstage musical in a way. Yeah.
And it's got horror mixed in with it.
Well, you're talking about kind of the horror thing. The big thing that kind of comes up to me, and I don't know if you know this term, is the ghost light.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You put it out, right? Put it out in the middle of the stage.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It illuminates the empty stage is what it is. And it's kind of the superstition to scare away ghosts is kind of what it is why it's called the ghost light. There's your theater history there. But yeah, so there is like an inherent supernatural or superstition quality to, I mean, even in theater in general, like it's the whole like, don't say good luck, say break a leg. It's like there's something about like you don't want something to go wrong.
The Scottish play.
Yeah. So what if you take that to a horror aspect and push it not just to like the superstitions of the play going right? What if it becomes an actual horror story? And I do think that's why Stage Fright really kind of fits into this, because it's not really a horror film, but I would count it as a thriller. And we come into the 1970s, two movies, I'll talk about them kind of both together, and that's The Goodbye Girl and Opening Night. Both came out in 1977. And so the first one is Goodbye Girl. And I was really conflicted about whether or not to talk about this movie, because The Goodbye Girl, I don't love it. I do like it. It was written by Neil Simon. It stars Richard Dreyfuss and Marsha Mason. And Richard Dreyfuss won his only Oscar for his role in The Goodbye Girl. And basically, it's a rom-com set in the theater world. Richard Dreyfuss is this a young actor who's moved to New York from Chicago. And he comes to live in an apartment. And what he finds out is that there's a woman living in his apartment. And the person he had sublet the apartment from just broke up with this woman and didn't tell her that he was leaving her. And so she's stuck at the apartment with her daughter, and they essentially, it's kind of the odd couple in a way. So they agree, hey, we'll live together even though we don't know each other, so we can kind of make it in New York City. And so you have this, like, Richard Dreyfuss plays this very kind of not hippie, but very earthy, like doesn't put anything bad into his body, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke. And he's like an actor on the rise, and he's been cast in this off Broadway play, off Broadway version of Richard III. And he's playing, and his director was like, I want you to play Richard III as if he was gay, is the whole thing. No hump, no crutch or anything like that, no limp. I just want you to take those physical things and put it in a mental state. And it's I don't know how it ages in the modern era, because it's very over the top in how he's playing Richard III as gay. Very funny for the time. I'm interested to see what people think about this in the modern sense. But it definitely establishes Neil Simon into this world, which is kind of why I want to talk about it, is that he was a playwright, and the big ones are The Odd Couple, which is probably his biggest success in terms of became a movie, became a TV show, became a sequel to the movie, became another TV show, and then became another TV show. So I have multiple TV adaptations throughout its years. And even with Barefoot in the Park, which was one of his earlier plays, he's kind of had a stamp on. He's probably one of the most prolific American playwrights of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And then that carried over into film. And so in some cases, you will have those theater roots pop up into his films, like The Goodbye Girl, with Dreyfuss being an actor. And Marsha Mason's playing a dancer, an aged dancer who now, after her boyfriend has left her, she now has to go back into the dancing world after she's been gone for so many years and has kind of aged out of it. She's like, I'm 33, I'm too old for dancing. And it's just kind of, it's an interesting take on like how quickly entertainment industry, not just Hollywood, but film and theater and television, will kind of write off women as they age out. And aging out could be just you pass 33. And that's a big part of it. And she's trying to get back in the dancing shape and all that. But essentially it's a rom-com set amongst the theater world. My favorite part is like Dreyfuss comes in and is like, if you don't leave this apartment, I'll call my lawyer friend downtown. And it's basically a direct line from Streetcar Named Desire. And Marsha Mason's like, oh no, you're an actor. Like she knows that, like, oh gosh, I have a lawyer acquaintance downtown. That's Streetcar Named Desire. It's just, and it's like she knows it because she's lived with actors so many times and fallen for horrible men who are actors. It's like, oh, everyone wants to quote Tennessee Williams to me. So you have this idea of the fading, the rising actor with Dreyfuss who's like trying to get by the skin of his teeth. And then you have a little bit of the falling star with Marsha Mason. And that comes in to play more with Opening Night, which is, I think, kind of the quintessential storyline for a fading star. And Opening Night was directed by John Cassavetes. It stars Gina Rowlands as this fading actress who's done theater and has done film, but she's at a point in her life where she is being seen for older roles, and she gets cast in this play. And what she does, she's the only thing that makes this character a character is her age, is that this woman is getting older and her life is changing. And Gina Rowlands, as an actress or as her character, doesn't want to accept the fact that these are the roles she's going to be playing. She just can't get by that she's getting older, and she's essentially fighting it the entire time. And so you're seeing her fighting through this movie. It's one of the most realistic portrayals of a theater like putting on a play that I've seen, because when it gets to the final third act, it's like you're following, like, you could be on the outskirts waiting for your actor to get off stage to go into the costume change or to fix an issue that's happened on stage. And that's what it captures. It captures the backstage area of like when these people are coming off and how you're trying to rush them back on. All the problems are happening. His character's showing up drunk. We have to put on the show. And what ends up happening with her, the big thing that kind of starts the plot, is that she sees one of her like obsessed fans getting killed. The obsessed fan kind of follows her down the street as they're driving away, and a car hits the girl, and Gina Rowlands' character is kind of haunted by this youth of this girl dying, and essentially creates this like imagination that this young girl is haunting her. And she kind of sees it as like her past self, her younger self, haunting her as an older woman. And she's trying to hold on to that youth the entire movie until finally, in the final third act, when she has to put on the play, she has to make a choice of whether to accept that she's aging or to like hold on to the youth she had. But moving on from Opening Night and into the 1990s I think this is a movie that gets called out a lot in terms of theater movies, and that's Waiting for Guffman. So Thomas, what is Waiting for Guffman about?
Yeah, it's about a small town in Missouri putting on a play for their I don't remember what the exact date is.
I think it's like 100th year,
an anniversary of their founding, and the local drama teacher who is a Broadway, as he would put it, retired Broadway star, but a Broadway reject, is hired to make it and to produce it and direct it, and it's just about Yeah, it's a mockumentary shot by Christopher Guest, who is mockumentary royalty. Yeah, it's just the process of making this play with a man with very high aspirations in charge and a bunch of just kind of random townsfolk in the cast.
Well, it's like Parker Posey, who's amazing, works as the Dairy Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Like her thing, I'm just like, I always have the Dairy Queen. I can always come back here.
Eugene Levy is a dentist.
And then you have the married couple who's played by Fred Willard, R.I.P., and Catherine O'Hara, who are like the couple who are travel agents who have never left the city of Blaine, Missouri, but they're like, oh, we have a great deal to Paris if you want to go. But yeah, it captures it. What's so unique about it too that we haven't really seen in this genre before that is that it captures the world of like amateur theater, and community theater.
It takes all the stuff that we're familiar with from watching these movies, like 42nd Street, about putting this huge play on, and it does it on a micro scale. And
you can argue even the diva aspect with Fred Willard's character.
Yeah, I mean,
is playing Corky, this like diva character.
My favorite scene in the movie is when he goes to the town council and asks them for. Well, it's like $100,000, right?
$100,000.
Yeah, he says, yeah, I need more money, and they're like, yeah, of course, how much? And he says $100,000, and they just all start laughing at him. And they're like, our full budget for the year is like $15,000. And then he quits because he can't get the money that he needs to properly do the show.
I mean, it's great. I mean, it's a quick watch, 84 minutes. It's a breeze, but it captures. To me, the realism of just like when I did community theater of just how like, yeah, this guy is a travel agent, or this guy works at a doctor's office, or this person works at an eye doctor, and they're in this play. It's all just like, it's the theater is an escape for these people and gives them just that like, it helps them scratch that itch that they don't get to have often. Like acting is not their career, but is a way to express themselves, is what it is.
Yeah, and one thing I really like about this movie too is it because sometimes I feel like one of the reviews I read was like, this movie's great if you want to watch people feel like self-righteous for an hour and a half, and I think sometimes people write like Christopher Guest stuff off as being like
it's making fun of it
or self-righteous. But one of the things I love about this movie is it shows you how much during the show must go on sequence, it shows you how much the people of the town are like really appreciating it. And it makes you realize that if like Corky and these actors could like get out of their own heads for just a minute, like they would see that they're bringing actual joy to the people in the town.
But they're focused on going to Broadway.
Yeah, their ambitions are so high that they'd like never notice that. But I love that. I love and they cut to these little cutaways of people like during intermission that are like, it's amazing. It's so much fun.
I love the guy who's like, it's so man, I wish he was in this play.
Oh, Michael Hitchcock. I love Michael Hitchcock so much. He's fantastic in this.
He's just like, man. But yeah, it just captured just like, and like you said, the importance of theater and the importance of art in small towns like this. Like this is, I mean, again, growing up in Alabama and Tuscaloosa, like we had children's theater and we had a local community theater called Tuscaloosa or Theater Tuscaloosa. And that's how we got plays in town outside of high school that were actually like had some sort of budget to it, not just kind of thrown together by a local high school. Because I would say some of our high school performances not that good. I've only walked out of one show in my entire life, and one of them was a high school performance in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I won't tell you which one it was. It was Oklahoma. And I agree with you. Is that if Corky and these people stop thinking about going to Broadway and these big, huge they're thinking outside the town. Weirdly, you could argue there's some connections with the Texas movie genre.
Shot in Texas,
exactly. There's a couple connections here in this genre with Texas movies.
Yeah, it reminded me of Texasville a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's shot in the same town.
That city hall definitely looked the same.
Look the same. Yeah, I agree. But it definitely it captures that the eccentric characters in a small town. When you get involved in the play, no matter what your job is, it becomes like it's definitely a release for you. It's a way to express yourself. I went to high school with a couple people who just like would not do drama in their last year. They're like, man, this was so much fun. I wish I did this the entire time. And like for them, people always see Glory Days as like the football and sports thing, but in some cases, glory days for other people is being on stage, and that promise of like a longer career of acting. It's like, I mean, even look at what's the show on Disney Plus?
High School Musical, the musical.
No, not that one. It's the
Encore,
it's the
right?
Encore. Yeah, like it's kind of capturing similar things that Waiting for Guffman does to me. Encore is just the serious version of it.
So, Brandon, what other movies really capture that feeling of high school theater for you?
Are we moving on?
That seems like you set us up for the perfect transition.
Well, the next movie we want to talk about, guys, is a movie called Camp. And Camp, it came out in 2003. Thomas has some things to say. That's why he's so excited to move on to this. Camp 2003 was an indie movie about a theater camp, a summer theater camp, which with this genre, there hasn't really been up to this point really teen-centric movies dealing with theater and the idea of being in high school and doing theater, or just being young and doing theater. And Camp was kind of the first one. It was directed by Todd Graff, who based it on his experiences at a theater camp that he was attendee to, and then also a counselor later on. And Camp is kind of the early digital indie boom of the early 2000s. It was picked up by IFC, I believe, IFC Films, and was, I think, at Sundance. Is that what you read? Was it at Sundance?
Yeah, Peter Travers said it was a Sundance hit.
Okay. So it's basically you're following a lot of these people at theater camp. You follow this one guy, this straight white male, who comes to this theater camp and is basically being chased after by all of the straight girls, but also some of the gay teenage boys that are there. Yeah, it's a guilty pleasure of mine, guys. And it was one that was shown to me like when I was in high school. And it was kind of the first film that I saw that showcased like teens doing drama. And it was also one of our most talked about films in the Facebook post that I made. When I asked for suggestions from you guys, Camp was, I think, the top suggestion. But Thomas has some thoughts on this movie because he'd never seen it before. And he was never in theater growing up, besides the stuff he talked about early on. So Thomas, what were your thoughts on the 2003 film Camp?
This was my thought process watching this movie because I never even heard of it. And then we posted on social media, hey, we're doing a theater episode. What should we watch? And everybody said Camp. And I was like, oh, this must be this like indie movie that is like beloved within the theater.
Undiscovered gem.
Yeah. And I was like, all right, cool. Absolutely. I'm down. It's got Anna Kendrick in it. Yeah, let's go.
First movie.
And then I get like 5 minutes into it and I'm like, oh, this is bad. Like, this is like, oh, all these people must have been saying it as a joke because everyone watches it and makes fun of how bad it is. And I got maybe another like 20 minutes into it, not like having a good time. Like, oh, this is The Room, but for like theater kids. And then I looked up some reviews and then I found out that people think this is a good movie. And then I just I didn't know what to think. Like I went from like the highs to lows to like complete confusion, and I was just all over the place. This movie's awful.
Okay.
It's the acting is terrible. The camera is terrible. Like I know we were very forgiving in the beginning of the digital age, but like most of the movie's out of focus. The script is bad. Like the structure is so bizarre. Like every synopsis I looked up of this movie like opens with like a washed up alcoholic Broadway star comes to teach at a camp. He doesn't show up until like the end of the second act, and he has like 2 scenes before then.
Yeah. He's not a integral part until much later. He shows up like day 3 of camp and is like, oh yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, and like part of what I read was like, oh, it was a huge thing for representation in 2003, and I'm like, okay, I can't go back to 2003 and relive what it was like to see, a majority diverse cast in a teen film, and dealing with coming out and dealing with drag and dealing with bullying because of being gay. I can't go back and like replicate what it felt like in 2003 to watch that, but now the way it is handled is awful. it's like, yes, this is a primarily diverse cast, but the main characters are all straight and white. And everyone else in the movie is going to be in love with these two main straight white characters who are both terrible actors and terrible characters as well. There's no reason everyone should like, what's his name? Vlad. There's no reason everyone should like Vlad. He sucks. He's terrible. It's so bad.
I never thought we would talk about camp on this podcast, but I'm so glad we're here.
And I was having a weird feeling watching it, and I was talking to you about it, and I was talking to my girlfriend about it. And
I got so many texts from him about
this. What it's like to have seen it when you were in theater, and from what I picked up reading some like user reviews on Letterboxd, was people were like, I was a theater kid. I didn't feel like there was anything out there film-wise that was contemporary that was for me, and this movie came out and it was for me. So I don't care that it's like lower quality. I don't care that it's not great. It was for me. And that was like, oh, it's a faith-based film for theater kids. Like, and I read someone else on Letterboxd said that after I'd realized it, but like that I was like, oh, that's it. Like, if you make something super, super, super niche, you can get away with almost anything. It feels like sometimes.
I mean, I texted Thomas. I was like, what if I've told you I've seen this movie multiple times? And he was just like, it'd be the first time I've ever doubted your taste.
Yeah, because if you had told me, like, when I was in that mode for like the first 20 minutes where I was like, oh, this is the room, I was having a great time. Like, yeah, I would have been like, oh, fun. Like, you guys all got together and like made fun of this movie. But no, that's not what it is.
No, it's not. I never watched it. I don't know how my other theater friends thought of it, like that were in high school, because it doesn't represent my high school experience with theater. I will say that, but spending a lot of time every year at like drama competitions, it's definitely, in terms of just like, I think I texted you, I was like, if I could get $1 anytime I heard someone perform a song from Chicago at a drama competition or just any type of showcase I went to, I would be so rich right now. Like, and it's kind of like, take that, like, it's the Sondheim thing in this movie is like, it's the, oh, let me see, or what's your audition piece? Oh, Don't Rain on My Parade. Oh, how original. That's how like theater thing is. It's like where it's like you hit a certain point and you're just hearing a repetition of everything that's been done before. When you're a teenager, because you're discovering those things like Sondheim, which you have a problem with in this movie because like Sondheim is a big character.
Yeah, like I said, if this is a faith-based film for theater kids, Sondheim is God. Like that's what it is. And
it's hero worship of Sondheim. Yeah, it's one that like when I watch it, every time I watch it, I'm just like, man, this is not good, and I don't know how I can convince anyone to watch this movie, but I still get enjoyment from watching this film. It's a comfort film for some people.
Yeah, I didn't. Comfort was the least of the emotions that I felt when I watched this movie.
But let's talk about how good Anna Kendrick is in this movie for her 3 scenes.
2 scenes. She has two good scenes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I love one of my favorite Letterboxd reviews, and you found it too. Was one where it was like, if you're scrolling through Netflix and your wife says, oh, there's a movie with Anna Kendrick called Camp. Maybe we should watch it. It's your duty to tell her that it's not currently available on Netflix or Hulu or anywhere else.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, if you're reading Anna Kendrick's memoirs and she mentions her time on a movie called Camp.
Yeah, somebody else in the Letterboxd reviews had said, just watch this YouTube link to like Anna Kendrick's one important scene in the movie.
Yeah, Ladies Who Lunch. Yeah, which is it's like when you watch, this is the thing when you know like kind of the acting, the rest of the movie is not that good, is when Anna Kendrick shows up, you're just like, oh, okay. Like the scene when she does Ladies Who Lunch from Company is like, she's on a totally different level than anyone else in the movie. And
but
that
she was
one
already
scene,
like fairly well established on Broadway at that point.
Yes, at that point. But she was like, I think 16 at the time, and it was her first film that she was in. I don't think she was in a movie for 5 more years. But yeah, no one else really besides her and then Robin DeJesus, who played the character of Michael. He's done pretty well on Broadway. He was in the original In the Heights production. Not many of the kids acted again.
Yeah, and I mean, shout out Robin. He just had the unfortunate luck of being paired up with this kid that played Vlad in like every scene, who is the worst actor in this movie and the worst written character in this. The main character in this movie about people who love theater camp is a straight white male who doesn't really like musical theater that much.
No, it doesn't. It's just like, hey, I wanted to be an actor. It
was like,
let me try to be an actor.
Oh, you're listening to Stephen Sondheim? You ever tried listening to hip hop? Like. Sometimes it's cool to just be normal and listen to normal music. Like,
yeah, like he's like everything wrong with like a white teenager. Not everything, but a good bit. It's like, yeah, the whole, have you ever, it's like, sometimes it's just good to be like everyone else is what is a line he says in the movie.
Yeah.
And I think it's because you can't read what the character's supposed to be doing. Like, is he supposed to be a terrible person? Is he supposed to be a manipulator? Or are we trying to like
is he supposed to seduce every single person in the camp? Because he does.
Every single person. Weirdly, even like the counselors. Yeah, I didn't know there was that big of a cult following with this movie until we did this show, because I was on the fence about including it because I knew, I was like, Thomas is not going to like this movie. Like, I didn't think there's any way you'd like this film. But because everyone kind of shouted it out on Facebook, I was like, okay, maybe there is a following here that we should discuss.
I've tried. I cannot convey to you the wave of emotions watching this, because I legitimately thought it was recommended by so many people. I legitimately thought going into this was a good movie. And it was such a bizarre experience to realize that it was not.
And I apologize to anyone that's listening to this that loves camp. Don't let Thomas sway you in any way.
You should be swayed. You should not like this. Film is entirely subjective. You're allowed to love anything that you want except for camp.
So mean. It was so mean.
I mean, it was like if someone came up to you and told you that like The Room was unironically their favorite movie. You can't step back. You don't have perspective on this. I came to this movie fresh as an adult. And I understand awful movies that you watch as a teenager that you're like, oh, I have a soft spot for that movie because I watched it a ton as a teenager for some inexplicable reason. But yeah, the cultiness around this is weird. Like it deserves like I would be in full support of like screening this like The Room and having a blast with it. And I think if everyone opened their minds up, they would recognize that is the way this movie needs to be digested.
So if I come to Atlanta, is that what we're going to do? We're going to do a screening of camp.
Yeah. And we can all just like throw stuff at the screen when one of the main characters say bisexuality doesn't exist. That's like seriously. And she's supposed to be the like heroine of the movie.
I don't think this. She does say that, right? Yeah. Yes. Okay.
And they never resolve it. She never like apologizes or like she never changes her opinions or anything.
Now here's my question.
This is also the leading white female who stars in Dreamgirls in this movie.
As Effie White. Yeah.
And they never bring up that's a problem at all.
That's questionable. Yeah. It is a questionable movie. I'll agree with you on that. I don't know how to follow that. I don't want to say a but. I don't want to throw a but in there but it's worth watching. Yeah, I get it.
Film is subjective. I'd say that again. Taste is subjective. You're allowed to like what you like, but it's bizarre.
I remember what I was gonna say.
The support for this movie is bizarre.
But let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Is there, and I think you're kind of seeing it with Disney.
You did just say last week you thought our tastes were too alike. So
and now we're here.
Yeah, I'm bringing it. I'm bringing the contrast.
Now take a theater camp as a setting, and you do it as a TV show
like this with these actors.
Not with these actors, not with this crew, but like the setting. Mainly, what I'm trying to say is like no one's really explored the setting of like teens doing drama in high school, except like Disney things like High School Musical or whatever.
False, my friend.
What am I forgetting?
Like 2 seasons ago, there was a television show exactly about this with Josh Radnor in the lead.
No, I do not count that show. I do not like that show.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't count camp. I do not like camp.
That's another problem, by the way. I will go with that. Rise is very problematic. Maybe I won't say more so, but dude, they had and Rise. And this is a tangent that I didn't expect we were gonna get into today. In that show, you have a Rosie Perez as a drama teacher, and because this white English teacher comes and is like, hey, I want to revamp the drama department, they just basically set aside Rosie Perez to let this white guy come in and do the drama department because he listened to Hamilton. Like, that's so problematic. Like the
I didn't watch it. I just
I
remember when they
watched
were
it.
casting it. I was working in casting while it was.
I watched it and stopped because it was also just like, I mean, there were like tropes of like, oh, let's just do Grease instead, and they're just like, we've done Grease before, which is a very like, that's a whole other topic of theater discussion. But like, yeah, it's like episode 1 or episode 2. It's just like, yeah, they're like him and his family is listening to Hamilton, and he was just like, yeah, like this is what inspires me. I'm just like, no, come on, this can't be it. You can't just be, yeah, we're gonna come in and do Spring Awakening because I saw Hamilton and I want to change these kids' lives. And like Rosie Perez just like, I'm sorry, problematic problem. But I do think camp is like, you have Glee because of camp.
That doesn't make me like it more.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying like literally you don't have Glee without camp. I'm just saying that as a fact. I'm not saying that to sway you or to sway anyone. I am just stating there was an influence for Ryan Murphy because of this movie.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Camp.
But do you think there is a world where you can tell a story in this setting?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
my thing. I think there's something to explore here, and that's why I like the movie. I didn't think we were gonna spend this long on camp, but why I like the movie is because I do think there is potential in the premise, but it's the wrong people behind it.
Yeah, and I'm not. Yeah, I like I said, I fully recognized that in 2003. What I read in a lot of the reviews was people being very excited that even though it was a very flawed movie, it felt very diverse and that it gave a voice to people who didn't have voices at that point. Now it has not aged well. The way in which they gave voices to those people, we recognize now, are not adequate ways to represent people.
I'll agree with that.
But I think if you had people of color and queer people in a writer's room and everyone was sharing their experience with growing up with theater, I think you could get something very interesting out of it.
So we agree on that. Yeah. I agree completely with that because I think why people attach to this so much is because it's the only thing out there that kind of represents them in some way, not fully. Like I said, my high school experience was not like this, but there are parts of it. Anyway, what clip should we play for camp? I don't know. I think it has to be Anna Kendrick, maybe. I don't know.
No clue.
We'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. The clip that we're gonna play is now. Now into our next movie, which is this is a little bit of a sequel to our last episode on Richard Linklater. Our next movie is me and Orson Welles, and we had talked a little bit about this in terms of Linklater's canon, but I really wanted to bring it back and kind of discuss more about it in the theater genre. And can you tell us what me and Orson Welles is about?
Yeah, it's about a teenage high school student who is obsessed with like modern theater of the time, which is set in what, the 20s?
30s, I think. Yeah.
But when we're introduced to him, he's reading John Gielgud's adaptation of Shakespeare. He's obsessed with like the current of what is pop theater in his time, which is like younger people adapting Shakespeare. And so he goes into New York on a day trip and just happens to run into Orson Welles' acting troupe at the Mercury Theater, and works his way into getting a small part in the show, and in being in the show becomes friends, forms a kind of like mercurial relationship with Orson Welles and the people that surround Orson Welles, including Joseph Cotton. And yeah, it's just kind of it's like a coming of age, like finding, someone who's, I texted you, I said, this feels like a spiritual Dazed and Confused kind of. It's this young kid kind of lying his way into a place that's like beyond him, that's kind of out of his reach, but landing it and just suddenly gaining like all these mentor figures and just taking in everything he can in a short period of time. But yeah, it's set in like the week leading up to the opening of this play.
And the thing about Welles at this point, Orson Welles, before he got into film with Citizen Kane, he was a prodigy. He did theater from a young age and was highly intelligent, did radio. And so at this point, he's doing theater and radio all at the same time. And he worked in the WPA, like during the Great Depression. He kind of helped artists who were on down their luck and kind of created plays for the government, basically. And the Mercury Theater was kind of his first outing, or this play is his first outing outside of the government and out of the kind of works progress groups and all that stuff. The WPA. And so it's like everything's on the line for Orson Welles in this play. And he's doing Julius Caesar, but what was so unique about Welles is that he would take a play like Shakespeare and try to update it for a modern era. And so with this play, which was so kind of famous, was that he took Julius Caesar and kind of put it in, I mean, kind of Nazi Germany in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fully
a modern fascist regime.
And when you actually watch the play, and they tried to recreate the play in the movie as close to his actual play was, with the lighting design and the way the stage was, and play's pretty damn good the way they update it. But Welles was essentially, like, as people have kind of said at that point in time, he was probably the most intelligent American, or the American that could understand and comprehend and dissect Shakespeare the best. And this comes up to your to be or not to be line, which is what basically what's the scene what happens
that's
in it?
How when they first meet, that's how Zac Efron wins him over, is he says, "Did you hear me do Hamlet?" He had put Hamlet on as a radio play, and he said, "What'd you think of my Hamlet?" And Zac Efron says, "I thought it was perfectly done, and I'm glad you cut out the to be or not to be scene, because that is the most that soliloquy doesn't move the plot along at all, and you had to cut the play down to an hour, and that was the thing that needed to go." And it's obvious from the way they're speaking that he took a lot of flack from the critics for getting rid of that, and he's like, "Yes, you get me." And that is the "you're in the place" moment. That was like exactly
you understand me.
Yeah, that's exactly what we wanted to hear. And that's also when we start to realize that Orson is surrounded by a bunch of yes men, and then the way to get what you want out of Orson is to just tell him exactly what he wants to hear, which continues throughout the movie.
But I really loved this movie.
Yeah, I was very, very, I had a great time. It reminds me, it's like Linklater's version of Almost Famous, but for theater. But it feels a lot like Almost Famous.
That's a fair point.
In a good way.
In a good way, yeah.
But you're just like, especially being that young and not being like you don't have the emotional intelligence to understand these people that you're around, and these types who are just like all over the place.
These artists.
And it's always interesting to watch someone who's young and who is very like emotionally simple have to navigate these people who are just like your best friend one moment and your worst enemy the next, and they don't know how to do it. And this was probably my favorite performance I've seen out of Efron.
I agree, and it was right after High School Musical. I think he said he still hadn't done the third movie yet, and he was just like, no one was wanting to cast me outside of like teen dramas or teen musicals or just teen films. And this was like, oh my gosh, this is an actual part that someone wants me to like do. And he's great in it. And I think Christian McKay as Orson Welles might be the best portrayal of Orson Welles I've seen from anyone. Because Orson is just kind of like, you can go over the top with Orson Welles. And there's a movie called Cradle Will Rock, which I think is a fine movie. But the guy who's playing Orson Welles is just not, like, it's not Orson Welles. It's a dude who's just trying to play Orson Welles, if that makes sense. Like, he really captures Orson Welles in this movie. To his voice, to kind of his demeanor, to how he'll be in the middle of a speech in the play, but be making jokes, and how he can essentially make jokes in Shakespearean language in a modern conversation. It's just, he captures the essence of Orson Welles so incredibly well. And it's a great moment when the play, it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, when the play becomes successful, and this is kind of Orson's full on, kind of probably the thing that's haunted him the most his entire career was, how am I going to top this? And that's what Christian McKay says when the crowd erupts with applause, is how the hell am I going to top this? Because he was always doing that. He was always trying to top himself till he got to a point where he couldn't do it anymore. But yeah, it definitely you get this in terms of how is this theater. You have the Act 3 show must go on. You have the whole backstage drama with all these characters and the variety of different characters. Would you argue that Orson falls into like the diva category?
Yeah.
You have another character as well that does the same thing.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, Orson is definitely the one that it's just like you're tiptoeing around. You're just trying to figure out how to make happy all the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, even down to like the kind of side with like To Be or Not to Be, like the kind of side character who's always joking around, who gets this like big break right at the end there. I forget that.
The character name is Norman Lloyd, and he's the principal or whatever in Dead Poet Society.
Okay,
that's the character he worked with Orson in the original plays, but it's played by an actor named Leo Bill.
But yeah, they're set throughout the whole movie. He's like setting up to play Sin of the Poet and have this big scene, but you get the feeling he's like the kind of class clown of the group. And then Orson cuts a scene, and then in the last minute, when you're supposed to believe Orson's had his like big change of heart about everything, he gives Sin his scene back, and then he blows everyone away.
Yeah, it's a great scene. It's again similar to the guy playing Greenberg playing Shylock and To Be or Not to Be, like you said. And it definitely, like, you have the kind of jokey things in this movie throughout, but in those moments, that's where it really captures the world they were living in at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I love this movie. In terms of Linklater aspect, it's a shame that this was his least successful film in terms of box office, but honestly I think it's his most underrated, his most underseen, and possibly one of his best.
Yeah, I texted you, and like I said, kind of with the Dazed and Confused, like it feels like his most like secretly Linklater movie.
Yeah,
even though he didn't write it, he worked with some regular collaborators, and a lot of the dialogue feels like him, and it just feels like a bunch of people introducing the younger generation to something that they love, and the good side and the bad side of it, and that feels very much like him.
So moving on, we're getting towards the end here. There's a few movies that got brought up in the post I made on Facebook about films that fall into this genre, and there's a couple that we've discussed and tried to figure out as well. So I'm gonna throw off a few movies to you, Thomas, and you tell me if they're a theater movie, and we can kind of maybe discuss why real quick, but we'll just go through it. Chicago.
I think so.
Why?
I think it is like motivated by fame. It's about the even when it's not necessarily about theater, it's about the crowd that surrounds theater, and there's always like a weaving motivation of like theater and fame throughout it. It feels like it's not just there, it feels like it's a part of the movie,
and they're using theater like to perform in their minds is the thing. Like it's I agree with that. Black Swan.
I mean, I think you could do it would be a small group, but I think you can do a ballet, especially with
ballet dance,
dance too, if you want to involve that. But I think especially because if it weren't for how iconic the Red Shoes was as a film, I think the fact that the Red Shoes exist legitimizes that as its own like sub genre.
Yeah, I agree with you. Moulin Rouge.
I don't count it.
Okay.
If we're talking about like theater like that, it's about a cabaret. I mean, you can make a sub cabaret genre.
We don't have cabaret on our list.
Yeah, there you go. Cabaret. This one, what is it? Burlesque with Christina Aguilera.
Yeah, Christina Aguilera. Yeah. Burlesque. There's a whole other thing too of other movies from like the 70s that falls in that category as well. Don't Think Twice.
I mean, that one's weird, but I would almost put that more in our like stand-up comedy.
Yeah, I agree.
Than I would in this,
because it's improv. Last one or two more. Lady Bird.
I don't agree with that one. That is
I'd say no. I think that's a sequence. That's just a sequence in the movie.
Anyone who has ever done a play in anything does that is it's a plot point, but it's not, like I said, it's not.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Part of the motivation of the film.
Last one. White Christmas.
I think so. I think that's a backstage musical.
I would count it. Yeah, because they're putting on a show.
And then you see the show at the end. Yeah.
And that's another thing too of these earlier movies. Like I would not just call them backstage shows, like backstage musicals, but I'd call them backyard musicals. Like these early Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland movies that are questionable now because of certain things in them. But they're like these kind of people like, hey, let's put on a show. And sometimes it's a Broadway show. Sometimes it's a a show in their backyard. It's a band performance. It's anything, but it still follows the idea of a backstage musical, and I think White Christmas falls into that category. So stats, real quick, Thomas. Most popular movies within this genre on Letterboxd.
Camp.
Most popular? No, now on Letterboxd.
Including
we have not discussed any of these today.
Oh, okay. Are we going to discuss any of them in the future?
One of them, yes.
Birdman.
Birdman's number 2.
I don't know, man. Yeah.
Number 1, again, and you might not count these actually, but Marriage Story.
Yeah, I would say it's more of a plot point than.
He's a theater director. She's a theater actress. Okay.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like the story or the plot revolves around theater.
So we're taking Marriage Story off. Is what you're telling me? Is that what you're thinking?
That's my opinion.
Okay, we'll take it off. Sorry, Noah. So that changes things. So Birdman's number 1. Number 2, you also might not count this one. Rushmore.
I would actually, I'd count that one a little bit more than Marriage Story, because there is the there's the show at the end towards a show, and the putting of the show together is ultimately what brings everyone together. And I think it also has the kind of through line that life is a play, and this character is also trying to manipulate his own life like it's a play. I'd give that one to you more for sure. Okay.
Number 3. We have talked about this one now. Because we cut Marriage Story.
42nd Street.
No, that's way down there. It is Chicago.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
It's Chicago. Least popular movie.
Camp.
It's not Camp.
Damn.
Camp's actually it's higher up there.
Is it one we talked about?
No, we have not. You're not going to guess it. I'll tell you. It is a movie called Swing. And Swing, it was directed by Oscar Micheaux. This is a brief history lesson here for people. Directed by Oscar Micheaux. And Oscar Micheaux was the first African-American filmmaker. He started off in the silence into the sound era, and this came out in 1938. I've actually seen this movie. We watched it in Alabama in our film history class, and it was the example of African-American filmmakers at that time. And it's hard to find, and this is also just kind of a issue that we have come in contact with a lot when covering genres, is the lack of diversity within genre. And Swing is the only example of African-American actors that it's a all African-American cast in this genre, and it's only been seen by 86 people. It's good. It's very, I think, influential in terms of these characters are putting on a show. And Oscar Micheaux is also just a very influential person that is rarely talked about in film history. And I think that's very topical for what's currently happening in the country. But if you can find Swing, go watch it. If you can find any of Oscar Micheaux's work, go watch them if you can. So that's our least popular one, sadly. And then next up, we'll go with highest rated movies. It's not top 3, it's top 5 because they're all tied.
Oh, no, you just got to tell me, man. I'm never going to guess all 5.
All About Eve, 4.2. All these are 4.2. All About Eve, Children of Paradise, To Be or Not to Be, All That Jazz, and Opening Night are all up there. So, and just so you guys know, don't get worried. We are talking about All That Jazz, but that'll be a later episode, and we'll cover that at the end of the show. Lowest rated movies.
Camp.
Camp is one of them.
Yes.
Tied for third lowest at a 2.7. Can you guess the other ones? I don't think you'll get these. We'll go from 3 to 1. Tied with Camp at 2.7. Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen.
I've seen that. Saw that in theaters.
Yeah. I didn't see it in theaters. Next one, 2.4, Oscar-winning movie, The Broadway Melody. Very low. And then right at the bottom, at a 1.8, The Gallows, a found footage horror film set at a high school theater.
I remember when that one came out. Yeah, I did not see it.
Yeah, there's also a Gallows 2. So,
wow.
There you go. And then most appearances, 4-way tie.
Wow.
They all had 4 appearances.
Mickey Rooney.
Not Mickey Rooney.
Dick Powell.
Dick Powell has 4, yes.
Judy Garland.
Not Judy Garland.
Ginger Rogers.
Ginger Rogers has 4. They're all pretty much the same movie.
Who else?
Ruby Keller.
Okay, yeah.
And Joan Blondell.
All right.
And Joan. So quickly, Ruby Keller and Dick Powell were all in. Those 2 were in 42nd Street, Footlight Parade, Gold Diggers of 1933, and Dames. Dick Powell might edge out because I haven't looked at the other, because there's also like Gold Diggers of 1935 and Gold Diggers of 1937. He is in all of those, so he actually might win it. Joan Blondell, Gold Diggers of 1933, Footlight Parade, Dames, and she is an opening night. She is the playwright. And then Ginger Rogers with 4, in 42nd Street, Gold Diggers of 1933, Barclays of Broadway, which is a Fred Astaire movie, the last Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movie they did together, and a movie called Stage Door, which I wanted to bring up, and I guess we'll bring it now in our last mentions. Stage Door is a fun, like 1930s kind of, it's a female-driven theater movie where it's about all these kind of aspiring actresses who all live in the same boarding house, and it's Katharine Hepburn, Ginger Rogers, Lucille Ball, all of these kind of up-and-coming 1930s actresses at that time. If you can find it, it's a great watch, and I think kind of just, it captures the kind of theater of outcast trope that we've talked about. Do you have any last mentions?
Yeah, I think I would shout out Hamlet 2 and Noises Off as 2 comedies that I really like in here. Noises Off is a film adaptation of a play by Peter Bogdanovich, who we talked about recently with Texas Movies. It's just a lot of fun. If you like comedy of errors, I think it's incredibly well directed for a slapstick stage comedy adaptation. The way that it's handled is really fun. And then Hamlet 2 is just weird, but it was one of those that like came out when I was in high school, and it has like a small cult following, I think.
I agree.
But I mean, kind of similar to Waiting for Guffman, it in concept, like a high school play gets way out of hand, but it gets like way out of hand.
Yeah. Mine is Stage Door, and then also a fun one. I agree with Noises Off. I actually did Noises Off, by the way. I was assistant stage manager in that play, and my only job, because have you ever seen the play on stage?
No,
by the way,
no, I've only seen the film.
So basically, what happens in the play, what we had to do, it's a 3-act structure, and the whole idea, and they do it in the movie, is the first act takes place in front of the stage, like when they're rehearsing. The second act is done showing the backstage antics that's happening, and act 3 is when they're performing it in front of people and everything goes crazy. So we did that, and so the idea is that we had to they built a set that could rotate, and that's kind of what you have to do with Noises Off. You have to build a set that will rotate between each acts. So like my only job was to push the set to where it rotated during the acts. So I was
sure he did it wonderfully.
I was the big dude who like would get in the middle of it and just like ram my shoulder into a certain spot and just rotate the entire set 180 degrees. And I did nothing the rest of the time. Anyway, yeah, and there's some I want to watch. So I got recommendations from people on our Facebook page. One is In the Bleak of Midwinter, which I'm going to watch, directed by Kenneth Branagh. One called Floating Weeds by Ozu, and a couple others. Where should they start? Quick thing. Where should they start in this genre?
I mean, I do think 42nd Street is a great intro. Like it is iconic for a reason, and it's on HBO Max currently.
Yeah.
I also I think we both really liked Me and Orson Welles. I think that's a fun one to get into it too.
I think both are good choices, especially in terms of the backstage component. So yeah, for the people that are going to follow us the rest of the month when we're delving into theater movies, here's kind of the rundown of what we're going to do. So our next episode, we're looking at Birdman, starring Michael Keaton, Edward Norton, Emma Stone, and Naomi Watts. That's going to be kind of our contemporary movie. And then we're also going to be doing, actually, our next episode is not Birdman, it's All About Eve. We're doing All About Eve starring Bette Davis, that came out in 1950. And then we're following that up with Birdman starring Michael Keaton. And then our last episode of the month, focusing on the theater genre, is we're doing a director episode on Bob Fosse, which I think is going to be interesting. He didn't have a lot of movies, but had a huge impact in terms of film, and kind of one of those few directors that was able to transition from theater to film pretty smoothly and still did it all at the same time. And that's kind of what All That Jazz was kind of based on. And we'll talk about that when we talk about his director episode. But yeah, that's all we have for you guys today. Make sure you subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can find us on Stitcher now. We added ourselves on Stitcher. And make sure you give us a rating, give us a review, tell us what you think. And like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Medium, and all that good stuff. We want to hear from you guys. Thomas, as always, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, man.
And guys, thank you so much for listening. We hope you listen to more episodes soon. Bye.